So, Creative Cat Productions has really taken off lately. Word is you guys are rapidly approaching 2,000 subscribers.
Well, we've been gradually moving beyond the retro gaming market. You know, we'd like to start doing a series on the Nintendo Switch, since they've sold over 100... Enough! I've heard enough about the Nintendo Switch, a full-on video game console that can connect to a TV that's also totally portable and comes with its own built-in controller and backlit screen. I did that. That was me, Crazy Joe Miller, and I did it back in 1995, before anyone else. It's my idea, I made it, and now the world is gonna know.
Hey there, buddy. Why don't you just calm down? What in the heck?
Whoa, you blew him away. Wrong. As usual, I sent him where no man has gone before. Sephora? No, I'm Crazy Joe Miller, not Cruel Joe Miller. No, I sent him to the Star Trek Bridge Simulator for the 32X. Hello? And that's where you're gonna be too, buddy, unless you do as I say. You guys do the YouTube. You're gonna tell the whole world about me, about my incredible invention, or else the old man gets it.
What invention?
The Sega freaking Nomad.
Oh yeah, the Sega Nomad. Hi, and welcome back to Creative Cat Productions, the channel where we cover retro video game stuff. Anyway, very recently some of us at the CCP just found out about the Sega Nomad. And by some of us, I mean me. So okay, I know what you're thinking. What the heck is a Sega Nomad? Well, that's a good question, and keep it down, he'll hear you. Anyway, that's the question we hope to answer today.
Or else!
Right, or else. And you know what? I'll do even better, because I'm gonna show you why the Sega Nomad completely failed.
Wait, that wasn't part of the bargain?
Too late, dude. Part 1. What is a Sega Nomad? Okay, so this is a Sega Nomad. It looks pretty cool, right? But on the other hand, there's not much to say about the technology, other than that it's a portable Sega Genesis that could play Sega Genesis cartridges, although in quite the awkward manner. The Nomad was released in 1995, exclusively in North America. It had 6 buttons, like a Model 2 Sega Genesis controller, a really nice D-pad, and an LCD screen that was very similar to most other portable game devices from the time period. In other words, it totally sucked. The screen is grainy and suffers from terrible motion blur that makes playing games on it practically impossible. In fact, if you actually find one of these, you'll find that the first thing everyone does is replace the screen with a new one that makes it actually playable. But you should also keep in mind that screens this bad were normal back when the Nomad was released. But in case you don't want to mess around like that, and you have a CRT television from the 90s, then you can actually just plug your Nomad into the TV and play it like a regular Sega Genesis. It even has a controller port for your regular controllers. This means the Sega Nomad was both a home console and a portable console at the same time, more than 20 years before Nintendo released the Switch. Of course, the Switch works on modern televisions, has a functional screen, a convenient docking station, internal memory, and a battery life greater than 3 hours. And constantly broken controllers that take so long to set up you're better off running to the nearest 3DS. But we don't talk about that. By the way, I think I should warn you, you're gonna need a lot of batteries if you want to actually use the Nomad for portable gameplay. So it's not exactly like the Switch, but at least the Nomad is an interesting way to play Genesis cartridges portably. Part 2. Where did the Sega come from? The year was 1993. And Sega had a brilliant plan. You see, Sega saw that Japan Airlines had electrically powered armrests on their planes. Most likely so that passengers can plug in one of those giant laptops from the 90s. Seriously, how's this supposed to be portable? Anyway, Sega said, hey, why don't we make a way to promote the Sega Mega Drive on Japanese airlines? So Sega stuck the motherboard of a Sega Genesis inside of a big 6-button controller, and then connected that to one of those little TVs they put in front of passengers. And there you go, the flight from Hokkaido to Osaka just got a lot faster. They called this brilliant idea the Sega Megajet. Sega sold these to the Japan Airlines, and the Japan Airlines in turn would rent these abominations out to their passengers as just one more way to gouge the customer before the plane finally landed.
すみません。君が探しているものはあるよ、ベイビー。この男とソニック・ザ・ヘッジホッグはどうでしょうか ?3000 円になります。
Anyway, let's skip all the way to America in 1995. By 1995, Sega had done a lot in North America. The Genesis was already like 6 years old, they had the Sega CD and the Sega Game Gear, and the 32X had already been launched and abandoned. And 1995 was also the same year that the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation would come out in North America, so Sega really had a lot on their plate juggling all this hardware. And then some Sega executive was like,
Hey, we need more stuff.
Then, from out of the shadows, comes one of the greatest men at Sega of America, Joe Miller! Sega's Vice President of Product Development. And what does a Vice President of Product Development do? Well, he develops new products. That's what he's paid to do, and that's exactly what Joe Miller did. And with abandon. Sound strategy, commercial demand, future of the company? Forget all that. Joe Miller wasn't limited by soft-minded practical questions about whether or not Sega should introduce new hardware in the market. Joe Miller was a visionary, a creator, and his only limit was whether or not he could introduce new hardware. Joe Miller developed his heart out, creating consumable solutions to problems that didn't even exist.
Genius, I know.
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to play the Sega Genesis over the internet in the 90s? Of course not, but then again, you're not Joe Miller. Joe Miller was the main guy behind the Sega channel, and it truly was exciting and cutting edge for the time, allowing a few fabulously wealthy subscribers access to a rotating library of over 50 Sega Genesis games that were updated every few weeks. It was essentially a streaming video game service decades ahead of the curve. Or have you ever wondered what it would be like to play the Sega Genesis without the use of a controller? What if you could punch and kick your way to victory for real? Enter the Sega Activator from 1993, one of the most infamously bad products to come out of the Sega R&D in the 90s. It hardly ever worked properly, and amounted to little more than an unresponsive and ridiculous-looking way to tap the A, B, and C buttons. Now, I don't know if Joe Miller actually came up with this product on his own, but as the head of product development in 1992 and 1993, the Activator is certainly largely his fault, since, well, if something sucks this bad, it would have been his job to cancel it. But that's for sissies. Joe Miller is also the dude that came up with the 32X. Joe proposed the 32X add-on as an answer to SOJ's desire for a brand new video game console, specifically designed for the US market in order to compete with the Jaguar and the 3DO, two of the hottest video game consoles of the 90s.
Sure, not.
Rather than make a whole new system, Joe Miller suggested an add-on that would be a cheaper alternative. An add-on that required you already own a Sega Genesis, required its own separate power supply, and had a library of a few dozen mediocre games. Take that, Atari! The 32X successfully split Sega's market share and resources between two separate consoles in 1994 and 1995, essentially helping ruin the launch of the Sega Saturn and, in the long term, doom Sega's chances of survival in the console gaming market. But Joe Miller wasn't done there, because legend has it, he's also behind the Sega Nomad. Some sources indicate that the idea was Joe Miller's all the way, and yet in an interview with Sega 16, Joe Miller himself indicates that the push to create a portable Genesis actually came from Japan, and he wasn't personally sure why Sega wanted to produce a portable handheld Genesis. He just went ahead and did it. Because as the senior vice president of product development, it wasn't his place to ask questions or know stuff, it was to develop new products. The reason for this, and why I'm certain that Joe Miller or someone who works for him actually did come up with the idea for the Sega Nomad on their own, is due to a phenomenon known as bureaucratic tyranny. That is the tendency for departments at large institutions or large corporations to spend 100% of their budget and produce as much output as possible, regardless of whether or not such output is actually good for the long-term health of the company. For example, if a company were to create a department of decorating for Christmas, and the head of that department was motivated to keep his job and prove that his Christmas decorating department was valuable, then he would be incentivized to spend 100% of his Christmas decorating budget and to decorate as much as possible, regardless of whether or not more decorating was actually needed or if people even wanted it. In fact, if he was really ambitious, then he might even measure personal success by expanding Christmas decorating beyond present limitations. And given enough time, an effective and energetic bureaucrat might be able to justify Christmas decorating 7 months out of the year. This is because bureaucracies are frequently funded on the basis of the normal annual spending and measured on the basis of their quantitative outputs. Since Joe Miller was head of product development, then his merit as an executive of Sega of America would have likely been measured almost entirely in terms of how many new consumer products he put on the market, regardless of whether or not any of those products were actually potentially profitable after they were manufactured and marketed. And that's exactly what happened with the Sega Nomad, yet another solution to a problem that didn't even exist, making the cheap, nearly irrelevant Sega Genesis into an expensive handheld video game console. A concept so bananas that only a product development department could have proposed it, and it failed horribly. Or did it? According to Wikipedia, a completely trustworthy source of course, the Nomad sold 1 million units. I get that's not a lot compared to the Genesis or other handhelds like the Game Boy, but 1 million sales of anything is pretty impressive to me. Because, after all, I'm just a little boy. But if you don't trust me or my opinion, then why not listen to this guy, my dad, a 42-year-old father of 4.
I actually remember the Sega Nomad, a weird consumer product that a lot of people sort of forgot about. Probably because it was only available in a few stores like Toys R Us, and also probably because few people bought one of these things. Now, I never personally actually owned one of these things, but I definitely recall it being on display at Toys R Us around 1995, sitting there collecting dust next to the Virtual Boy and the Atari Jaguar. It was pretty cool looking, like a giant Game Gear with 6 buttons. But I remember thinking it cost way too much money, and I already had a Model 1 Sega Genesis from 1989. Why would I want another Genesis? To take with me outside? First of all, not with that screen. You couldn't see on those portable screens, unless you were under absolutely perfect conditions, like with no glare at all. And second, I didn't go outside much in 1995. Didn't you hear? I had a Sega Genesis. Plus, I'm from El Paso, Texas. Not much to do outside there, if you know what I mean.
Well, thanks for the testimony. So there you go, that's the Sega Nomad. And according to a 42-year-old man...
I'm actually 41.
According to an old guy, the Sega Nomad was a failure, insofar as not many people played it or remembered it. And why, you ask? Because it came out way after the Genesis was relevant, cost like $180 at the time, when the Genesis cost less than half that, had horrible battery life, an awful screen, and was only available in the US at Toys R Us or specialty electronics stores, and even there in limited quantities. And that's pretty sad, because you know what? It was a pretty cool idea, and it really is sort of like a Sega Switch, just 20 years too early, or maybe 5 to 6 years too late, depending on how you look at it. So Crazy Joe Miller, we salute you. This is actually kind of a cool idea.
Yeah, you really mean it?
Yeah, if I had $189 and unlimited batteries back in 1995 and didn't already own a Sega Genesis, then I might have been really interested in this. I mean, look at it. It looks really cool.
Wow, you guys are really swell. Thanks for helping me get the word out about my Sega Nomad. You know, I'm sorry about what I did to your fancy cocktail party. Say, why don't I take you boys out for a milkshake to make it up to yous?
Sure, why not?
Come on, it's on me. I'll tell you about the time I tried to turn Sega of America into a PC software developer, just when we should have been developing new games for the Saturn and Dreamcast.
Wow, sounds like something Sega would do.
It sure does.
Well, that's the end of our video. What do you think of the Sega Nomad? Have you ever seen one? What do you think of Joe Miller, the father of the Sega channel, the 32X, and the Nomad? I heard he wanted to be an astronaut. That's pretty cool. Anyway, let us know what you think and more in the comments. And thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye now.
Hello? Hello? Is anybody out there?
Hello? Can someone get me out of here?